Thank you very much for showing up tonight. For those who do not know who I am, I'm Sheriff Tim Svenson, Yamhill County. And before we start, I want to point out a few key players that are in the audience that are here to listen to the conversation. Not necessarily to participate, I'm not going to put them on the spot, but they are here because they have a vested interest in it. Standing in the back, Commissioner Rick Olson, one of the county commissioners. Right here in the front, Commissioner Mary Sterrett. We have the county administrator, Laura Schaubold, sitting right there. The deputy county administrator, Ken Huffer. One of the county councils for the county, Todd Sadlow. In the back, we have Chief Matt Scales, along with Captain Tim Simons for the city of McMinnville. They're here to observe. I told them that I promised I wouldn't put them on the spot for any direct questions about the city and their response. So if you have questions or concerns about how the city of McMinnville is going to be handling things versus the county, you'll probably want to jot those down for another time to address it with the city. Sitting in the front right here is the executive director for YCOM, Patty Sowers, our dispatch center, along with her operations manager, Rita Baker. And then the most important people sitting up here in the front, Captain Chris Ray, who is in charge of our administration division and oversees the dog control program, and my executive assistant, Emily. She's the one that keeps me in line. So, to start off, we got a nice little ground rule section. Law enforcement, we like to keep an even playing field. So basically, we're going to have a time for questions and comments. So at the end of our presentation, there'll be plenty of time for you guys to come up and ask questions. During that time, we're going to ask that you be respectful of the time. There's a lot of people here. If your questions were already answered during the presentation, we ask that you just pass when it comes to your time. But if you still have questions, we'll have you come up to the front, ask the question, and then we'll do our best to answer it. If we don't have an answer tonight, we will be jotting down the information. We'll go back and research it, and then we'll put together a list to post on our website and push out on social media so you guys have the answers. And of course, if you have cell phones, could you put them on silent so that it doesn't disturb the meeting? Okay, a couple of the myths. Why are we having this town hall meeting? We're having this town hall meeting because back in July 1, or a little bit before, we sent out a Facebook post on our Sheriff's Office Facebook talking about some of the changes we were going to do with dog control. We had a county work session with the commissioners in our office where a handful of citizens were there, but there wasn't as many citizens as there are here tonight. So we started sending out information on kind of what we're going to do, what the role of dog control and the path that we're going to be going down. Immediately, we started getting all sorts of Facebook, social media posts, comments. This is a good one. The county had been offered a nice six-figure donation that would have saved the county kennel out at the fairgrounds and the program. I can tell you that that's not the case. In fact, the individual that was very gracious to help support our program 5, 6, 7 years ago, we had conversations about what it was going to take. We had some dollars that they were willing to put up with a county match. We started looking at it, and the dollars that we were looking at needing were going to exceed over $600,000, and that was not something that the county nor the donee could afford. So we didn't turn down this nice little big pot of money to continue moving down this path. Number two, that we're using the money to support other functions. I can tell you very clearly, and if you guys want to spend some time in my office going through my budget, I can show you where every dollar comes in and where every dollar goes out. Our program, we've been talking about being 100% self-funded. We don't get any funding from the county general fund. All of the funding that we operate our program off of comes solely from licensing fees, citation fees, and donations. Up until 2 years ago, our donations average anywhere between $15,000 to $25,000 a year for an entire year from people coming in, paying their license, saying, here's $100, put it towards the dogs. There'll be a slide coming up here where you're going to see the breakdowns of what our revenue looked like, how our expenses were breaking down, and why we got to where we are today. Another myth, it's a county requirement. We can just do away with it if they wanted to. That's not correct. It's a state law. State law requires any dog older than 6 months to be licensed and vaccinated. That we're not providing care and service of the animals. That's also not true. We still have a contract with a kennel. We have medical expenses. We have dogs coming in that we're paying a large amount of money every month to this provider to care for the animals. And then this one right here, dog control doesn't exist anymore, so there will be no one responding to lost and found dogs. And part of the main focus of our conversation tonight is, one, we do have patrol staff that are still responding to these calls, do it on a daily basis, but we also have a very large volunteer grassroots groups within the county that are also assisting us. So it's time for us to kind of change the way we do things. So, real quick, talk about the financial history. We're going to go over quickly what we discussed in summary in the April work session with the commissioners. We're going to start talking about, to clarify a little bit, what is going to change in the program and what's not, and then kind of the next steps, which is a very long list of things. So, right off the bat, it's going to be really hard for you guys to see the numbers, but that top line in that graph represents our revenue. Going back to the far left was in 2007-2008 fiscal year. So in 2007, we had $563,293 of revenue that came into our dog control program. In 2016-17, we had $348,406. And I believe a very large portion of that was a donation carryover from an estate. The next line is our personnel costs. So it started here in 2007 at $210,759. That was when we had basically 1 and 1.5 employees. And we started gradually increasing our staff. And you'll see that over time, gradually, our personnel costs went up. And it dipped a little bit in 13-14 because of some leave from one of our staff members. And it peaked at $318,226 in 15-16. But because of the budgetary reasons, we didn't have enough money to carry through the remainder of the next year. We had to lay off one of our staff members. So you see that our personnel costs went down to $219,000 this last fiscal year. The third line is our materials and services line. That's the one that's pretty much straight, flat, from $91,000. It peaked a little bit to $151,000 and is down to $129,000 this last year. That's our pens, papers, electrical, food, care, maintenance of the dog. And then our ending balance, which is the green line, which was really, really low in 2007, went really, really high because we were having $650,000 worth of revenue come in. We were saving $317,000 at the end of the year. And as everything else went up and our revenue went down, our ending balance drastically dropped to, we had less than $15,000 left at the end of 15-16. And we're projected to have roughly $67,000 at the end of this year, directly in result of the loss of one full-time person, and the last 2 months of the fiscal year, our second dog control officer resigned and went and took another job. So in April, we came together with the board and said, listen, same thing we had back 4 years ago when we were trying to figure out what we're going to do with the kennel. We didn't have the money to spend on buying a new kennel. So we started talking about what's another way to take care of the dogs, save the county some money, and put the money in enforcement and compliance. So the county worked with the sheriff's office. We came up with a plan to privatize the care of the dogs. A lot of people criticize that, saying, we have a kennel, you've got inmates, they can provide the care for the dogs free. The problem is inmates need to be watched. So we had 2 dog control officers, and at least one of them had to sit at the facility most of the time when the inmates were there to make sure that the inmates weren't doing anything wrong. So we transitioned the kennel away. We put the deputies in the field, and we went to a privatized kennel situation. As we saw that our numbers were continuing to go down, we were eating into our reserves a lot more. We did not have enough revenue coming in with the dogs that we had licensed in our facility. We were seeing that we had some savings in not having to sit out at the kennel. We had a little bit of increase in some revenue, but we had some decrease in our materials and services expense. It just wasn't catching up to our continued costs associated to personnel. So we knew going into 17-18, the fiscal year we're at right now, that we were going to be hurting, and we would need to eliminate the second position that we had for dog control, leaving only 1 records clerk to do clerical duties. So I went to the Board of Commissioners. We decided to have a work session to talk about it, to discuss kind of what else is out there. We're not the only county in the state of Oregon that has a dog control program. I can tell you that as the program exists today, we're one of the only counties in the state that do it this way, where it's 100% self-funded and is ran by the sheriff. Most counties in the state either have a dedicated taxing resource to it, they use general fund dollars for the program, and they have the programs ran from anywhere from an accounting department, from public works, to sheriff's offices that manage the program. So what we did is we looked at Deschutes County. Deschutes County seemed to have the best model as far as the position of where they were at, what they were wanting to do with their program, and how they got involved with the local nonprofits. Deschutes County has 2 main nonprofit shelters. There's one Humane Society in Redmond and then another shelter in Bend. And we reached out to Deschutes County, got a lot of information from them, how their ordinance worked, how their licensing worked. Were they primarily heavily on enforcement? Were they more of a compliance, working with the nonprofits? And they did a very good job of giving us a ton of resources and information on what their program looked like. As we sat down and started looking at it, we started realizing really quickly that the way our program in Yamhill County is designed, it hasn't changed with the times. We don't have the mechanism in place currently for dedicated funding from some sort of tax district. As much as I love taking care of animals, I personally don't feel that the general fund should be supporting that program, primarily because there's a specific population that we're serving, which are dog owners, and the general population shouldn't be supplying a lot of funding to that. So it's hard for me to advocate, okay, let's dump a ton of general fund money into the program. But as I was looking at all these successful programs, one thing that came around and around and around was partnering with local nonprofits. The successful programs, Washington County, Clackamas County, Deschutes County, parts of Marion County, are successful and run very good programs based on the fact that they have a good foundation in the partnerships with their local nonprofits. So after we met with the commissioners, I provided them a whole list of information as to why we should move that direction, why we have enough resources in the community to support that type of model, and that, in essence, what Deschutes County found is when they transitioned away from a heavy-handed enforcement where we're out there pounding on people's doors, telling them, go license your dog, to more of a compliance process where Deschutes County doesn't have a dog control officer going around doing compliance checks. They go to the accounting finance department of the county to license their dog. The Deschutes County Sheriff's Office responds to dog calls based on priority and the seriousness of the calls. they had an increase in revenue and licensing because people were voluntarily complying and licensing their dogs because they weren't concerned about the heavy-handedness. The way our program was designed, we had to stick it in your guys' pocketbooks when you come to pick up your dog because we needed to keep the doors open. When we got a dog and it's sitting in our kennel and we found out you hadn't licensed it for 6 months, we're going to charge you $80, $120, $150 to get your dog out. And the concept should not be, how much can that dog owner fork out when they're needing to get their dog out, to if it's all about the care of the dog, we need to be able to concentrate on rehousing that dog, and then we can figure out the other details. Licensing means one thing, to confirm that that dog's been vaccinated. And I can tell you that 99% of the dogs in Yamhill County are vaccinated, even the ones that aren't licensed. They take them to the vet, they care for them, they're the family pets. You know, you might have a handful of dogs that are out on random county properties that aren't vaccinated, that don't have licenses. But the whole concept is, it's based by statute around public health. In fact, there are statutes that specifically say the public health director and the public health department in the county is the one responsible to make sure that the rabies certificates are on file, and that they're supposed to file them with the county clerk, which is just kind of odd in my mind that that's what it's designed for. But we haven't had any issues in years, 50, 60 years, with rabies outbreaks or rabid dogs. So what a lot of counties started figuring out is, you know what, there are a lot of people out there, good people, that are trying to help take care of dogs and want the care of the dog to be the priority. And by doing that, Deschutes County naturally saw an increase in compliance, and they have a pretty decent program working. So we committed to starting the discussion and having engagement with local nonprofits. Very quickly, we were able to identify several groups within the county. Those groups are from all different parts of the county. They all have their own little thought of how they think things should go. They all have their own little idea of what is best for dogs, what's good in Newburgh may not be good in McMinnville, and what's good in McMinnville may not be good for the situation in Newburgh, and I accept that. But the hope is that when we continue down this road and we continue moving through this process, working with the county, working with our office, and working with the local nonprofits, that eventually we'll get to a point where we have a program that's based on a group of people wanting to help provide care and support for the animals, the county, who has the ability to manage the license revenue that's coming in, and maybe help leverage some ability to apply for some grants to get some funding to help pay back to these nonprofits to compensate them for the services that they're providing the county. So, what's changing? To start off, county ordinance. A lot of people have heard us talk about the county ordinance 692. That's what governs dog control. That's what governs what the sheriff's office and dog control officers can do. This is what prevented the sheriff's office from being able to allow assistance from a lot of local nonprofits and a lot of local vets that wanted to provide a service to us. By statute and ordinance, it wasn't allowed because of the way it was written. It's an old ordinance. We've had it for years. We've modified some things. We've updated things. Primarily what we've updated is the licensing fees and the fine structure so we could get more money. But the actual guts of the ordinance, we were in the process of revamping it completely. And then we went to the county and said, hey, by the way, county council, you remember all that work you've been doing trying to draft a new policy for us or ordinance? Could you scrap that and just take Deschutes County and put our name on it? In my mind, that's easy. That's how it works. But evidently, according to the attorneys, it's not that easy. So we are very close. Talked with our county council today. There's some final touches that need to be put to the draft, but that will be something that we'll be bringing to the board and going through the process of coming up with a new ordinance. The big deal with the ordinance is that it's going to allow for the county to partner with these local nonprofits to start providing the same service that we were doing. It's not going to be restrictive. Something that's happened already, which started a lot of this social media buzz, was that we went to the local jurisdictions saying, by one, we don't have any dog control officers anymore in the county. So the sheriff's office would be responding to dog-related calls in the rural parts of the county and the contract cities that contract with us for services, but the local jurisdictions would be responsible for responding to their own calls. We also, part of the ordinance, one of the things that we are going to be changing based off of Deschutes County's model is the license fee. We were having the 1, 2, and 3 year license option. The 2 year option only saved you, I think, $1, $2, something like that. A 3 year license saved you maybe $3, maybe $4 if you did it. But we had, if you look in our revenue lines, probably 98% of our revenue comes in on that 1 year license. Very little people take up the 2 and the 3 year. So to make it nice and easy math, we're going to do annual license every year, $20 for dogs that are spayed and neutered, $30 for the fertile dogs, and then we will have a senior license fee for $5 for senior if you're eligible. However, the dog has to be spayed or neutered, and you're limited to 2 per household. That's kind of the standard that we've seen across the state. If you needed a replacement tag, it's $4, and then we're not doing the 2 and 3 year license piece anymore. What's not changing? State law. It's still required to license your dog. There are still state laws that cover nuisance dogs, dangerous dogs, dogs at large, dogs chasing livestock. The majority of the calls that our dog control officers would be responding to under the county ordinance are covered in some sort of state statute. So my patrol staff, the ones who are working the rural patrol, and the deputies that are working in the contract cities will still be responding to those type of calls and handling them appropriately, issuing citations either through the municipal courts in Lafayette, Dayton, Sheridan, and Willamina, or through the circuit court in the county. The big calls, the dog bites, the crimes, all that stuff, it was already being handled by my deputies anyways. Our dog control officers didn't deal with that, even though a lot of people thought they were the ones showing up and taking it and saving the day. They may come and show up and assist with getting the dog in the back of the car, so we didn't have to put him in the back of our car and take it to the kennel, but our patrol staff were the ones investigating those cases, and that will continue to happen. We're going to continue to manage the care, including medical care of dogs that are picked up in the county and in the cities that we contract with. You'll see here in a second, we're going to talk a little bit about the next steps, the kennels, what we're looking at doing for kenneling. But we have lines specifically set up in our budget to cover medical care. And so we were going to continue to provide that to the dogs that are in our jurisdiction. And for now, we will continue to be the central point of licensing. We've offered up the option to the municipalities. The ones that would have the most benefit from doing it would be the city of McMinnville and the city of Newburgh and Dundee. But that would require them to start up, take on a new role. We offered that if they wanted to do that and be responsible for it, that they would maintain 100% of the licensing revenue that came in. But with the Deschutes County model, the partnership way of doing it, the county would get a percentage share of that license revenue for processing it, and a large portion of that revenue would be shifted to the cities to help pay for their cost for now having to manage their own program. So, next steps. And as I said, there's several next steps, and I'm sure there's things that we're missing. Obviously, like I said, we need to review and push forward the new county ordinance. It will include information about the kenneling fees, which a lot of people are interested in. Okay, I own a kennel, I live in the county. What's the process going to look like? Who's going to inspect it? We have some pretty good ideas of contracting out for an independent third party that can inspect kennels for a very low cost, a lot cheaper than what we can do it on our wage. And so we're going to put together a process of what that would look like. That would all be part of the county ordinance. Continuing to talk as we are tonight and continuing moving forward with getting in touch with these nonprofit social media groups, these groups that are kind of grassroots that are saying, hey, we have the ability to reach out to the public a lot easier than the sheriff's office can. We have a very successful campaign that we've been doing for the last year and a half. We've rehoused and rehomed several dogs already. We're going to try to develop policies and procedures and protocol to make sure the county is covered, the cities are covered, and that they're able to assist us with that process. It's going to require a little bit of some direction, a little bit of guidelines, like I'd mentioned before. What the city of Newburgh is going to want to do with their local groups that they have up there in Dundee, their guidelines and procedures might be different than what the city of McMinnville is going to want to do. That doesn't mean that it's better. It doesn't mean that it's worse. It just means there's differences. So the sheriff's office's role is to try to find a way to collectively work with all the groups because we have a much larger area to cover. Lost and found dogs. So we have been talking with the provider of our software. We've also worked with our local county IT. The biggest issue is what a lot of the counties that have really successful programs is they have the ability for the people who own dogs to opt in to say, if my dog is lost and someone finds it and they search my license or my chip number, that I allow certain information to be handed to some general person in the public, whether that's a name, phone number, address, whatever that citizen wants. We entered into a database, dogs found on the street on 3rd and Baker, and a local group picks up that dog, scans it, gets a chip, then they would have the ability to go into a database, search that chip number, find out who the owner is, and rehouse the dog much quicker than it would be for us to come out, pick up the dog, take it to the kennel, do the scan reader, process the dog into our jail, and then turn around and contact you to come pick it up. Providers for care. So as I'd mentioned, we originally had a contract with Pet Stop Inn. That contract ended June 30th of 17. We requested an extension through the end of September, primarily for us to come up with a process, to come up with, from listening what the citizens had to say, to come up with some other options to provide for a little better partnership and giving the counties multiple options for places to house dogs. So what we did recently is we requested quotes from 3 different shelters, Pet Stop Inn, which is our current provider, the Newburgh Animal Shelter, and the Homeward Bound Pets. Those proposals or quotes have all been brought back to us. Sometime tomorrow, we are going to sit down and go through those and score those to see what is going to work best for our county. And the idea behind that is going to be what we're going to be doing from October 1st through June 30th of 18 to get us through this fiscal year. Eventually, we will go through and we'll enter into some sort of MOU or contract. We've reduced the minimum amount of dogs, primarily based off of the fact that we have not had very many dogs in our facility for a long time. We have multiple groups that have been helping us rehouse the dogs, which is preventing us from taking dogs to the facility. And we'll enter into that MOU. There'll be some requirements that those kennels are going to have to follow. They'll have to follow the Senate Bill 6 requirements. They'll have to be able to be inspected annually and have spot checks to make sure that they're compliant with our minimum level of care for the dogs. But those would be something that would be put in place from October 1 through June 30th. And then we would then, from that point, over the next few months, start looking at what are we going to do for long term. And if we have to do a full RFP or go through another formal process to solidify what we're looking at doing, then we'll do that. Part of that RFQ that we didn't put up there, we also asked some of these groups if January 1, we asked you to help us do the clerical stuff that my staff member who's funded through the end of this fiscal year, but probably wouldn't be able to survive another fiscal year fully funded because of the way that the revenue is coming in. We asked them, give us an idea of what it would cost if we were to ask you to assist with entering the data of our licenses, to being that central point of contact for citizens who are looking for their dogs. You're housing the dog. Can you process that dog? Can you release that dog? Can you collect the fees? Can you basically do what our dog clerical staff is doing right now at the sheriff's office? And what would that cost you? That is going to be key for moving forward, because what I've found from other entities is that they've pushed a lot of this work to these organizations who have this volunteer base because, one, they want to do it. Two, they can do it for a good price. They appreciate the partnerships, and it's a good way to effectively spend money that the county has. And then, of course, I've already talked with, we've got a new county grant writer for the county. She and I have talked about the fact that we have this going on, and that there are multiple entities out there that would be interested in trying to find ways to partner with the county to apply for grants to help further their programs. Okay, so that being said, we will start calling out people that have submitted. I'll just stand off to the side. And if you can come up, I'll stand off to the side, but if you can come up here, and if you want to face the crowd, you can face the crowd. And again, if the presentation already answered your question and you don't want to come forward anymore, just let me know. Cynthia Turia?
Where am I supposed to stand?
Right here. Your question was, what will happen, or who do we call for injured animals day or night, and how can the county help with all the volunteer groups that want to help?
Yeah, I know that there are a lot of willing people, a lot of volunteer groups that have formed or are in the process of forming, and I want to know how the county is planning on supporting them. Now, you answered some of that, I think, but I'm kind of curious as to what standing these volunteer groups will have. What kind of authority is the county prepared to give them to take action and, pick up animals, temporarily house animals? Are they going to need to go through an approval process, some sort of vetting?
Yes. So the first question, as far as the animals injured being called, currently right now, our dispatch center is the one who will triage those calls as they come in. They're going to be dispatching them to the jurisdictions where they reside. The part that we're still trying to finalize, and the part that we're trying to kind of figure out exactly, and this is where I said it's going to be a little bit different for how the city of McMinnville deals with it, and it's going to be different with the city of Newburgh and Dundee, is that we also have these nonprofit groups that have formed through the social media, Facebook posts, where they hear the information being dispatched from our dispatch centers, and they're going out and assisting and picking up the dogs before we can get there, and they're rehousing them. So the process in which the county is going to want to make sure that those groups have the proper coverage, they're protected, that they're protecting the county, we will end up having to go through a process to allow them to do that. And then as we continue down the road, we have this program through the county. It's an economic development grant opportunity where people can apply for money from the grant from the county for economic development type projects. We have a large amount of money that was gifted to the dog control program through an estate. It was roughly $348,000. We had a conversation with the commissioners a couple years ago, and we decided that we wanted to spend on average $50,000 of that pot of money, $50,000 a year, in the care and maintenance of dogs. To date, in 2 years, or roughly a year and a half, just under 2 years, and we've spent roughly $86,000 of that $348,000. So that additional money that's sitting there that we're not spending on the care and the kennel costs for housing the dogs, my proposal would be that we come up with a program where every year these nonprofit groups could put together a proposal and request for grant funding for small pockets of money every year that the county could then grant to these nonprofits to provide the care of those dogs that they're housing temporarily and returning home.
Well, I guess part of my concern was these two things are actually connected in my mind, because I feel like as volunteers, if we're going to be effective and really work together, I think that we're going to need some training. You know, that the county should have some formal training in place and
on how to,
guidelines and things like that. And, you know, particularly when volunteer groups come across an animal that's injured, who determines whether that animal should be dispatched or whether someone is going to pay for it? So.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Yeah, that's one of the things our clerical staff is dedicated to do is when these groups start working with us to assist with the license processing, she's going to go out and train the staff on how to enter everything in the database, what kind of documents to look for, how to process everything. So that is going to be something that we'll continue to work on as far as training. Mike McInnes.
My complaint is about my neighbor and me called in several times about a dog. 4 dogs that are huge. I had a dog die in my yard. Reported that. There's no enforcement. There hasn't been any enforcement for years. Nobody does. This is rural. This is not city. And my neighbors called over 30 times. He even said it. No enforcement. Nothing was done. I know the dogs aren't licensed. The one that died in my yard was Parvo. It was a 140-pound dog. What do you do with a 140-pound dog?
I will hand this directly to the captain and have him try to search this address out and try to find out.
And the other thing is whenever you ask for somebody to report something, you make that person be a snitch that's in the neighborhood. Yeah. And there's a problem there because when you have people that aren't stable, I'll say, they blame you for their own shortcomings. And that's where we're running into even where I live.
Correct. No, I appreciate that.
It's a big problem.
I appreciate that. Elisa Owen.
Okay, so respectfully, I disagree with your premise that dog control only affects dog owners. It affects the community at large. And dog control is a community service. Government should serve the community and protect the vulnerable. And it's not always a money-making endeavor. And again, respectfully, I disagree. I think general funding should be provided, but I would like to hear when and why Yamhill County leadership decided dog control was no longer a worthy and necessary community service.
Okay, I appreciate that. I wouldn't necessarily say that I disagree that it's a community service. I think that to expect a program to be ran with the funding and the staffing that we have and the nature that we have, I've got 3 staff, or I had 3 staff, that cost me roughly $500,000 a year to operate and maintain. And I didn't have anywhere close to the amount of money coming in to maintain that. We can manage the same community service with spending our money more wisely, taking the dollars that the dog control have that come in and spread it out amongst the nonprofits that are designed and are willing to take care of the dogs. And we're going to continue to provide that support and that community service for the dangerous dogs, the dogs that are biting other dogs, the dogs that are having the issues with the attacking. But then we're going to have the volunteers to be able to stand up and help us support the other issues where you have dog owners who just can't afford to get their dog out of the kennel. And I agree, we shouldn't be making money off our dog control. Manuel. The manual.
The question was, why do I have to pay a licensing fee for my dog if my neighbor doesn't have to pay anything for his 5 cats? It seems unfair. My dog is on a leash whenever I walk him. All the neighborhood cats run around at large. They go in my backyard. You do what cats do in the backyard, and well,
I agree with you, and I have wondered that my entire life. Unfortunately, there is no statute in the state of Oregon that requires people to license or maintain cats. So,
would it be possible to start that here in town in order to increase funding for the animal control?
more than happy to direct you to the city of McMinnville at some point to decide that. Hey, I mean, all joking aside, yeah, I get there's a huge issue with cats. We've had a lot of groups in the community. We had the Yamhill County Cat Coalition for years, and I still think they're still around, who are trying to help provide spade and neutering clinics for cats, helping rehouse feral cats, trying to find ways to move the cat populations from within different parts of the city and different county areas and redirect them to areas where they're in homes, rescues, farms, you name it. The issue is that there's just not as much government backing. There is no teeth in the enforcement of that, and there's no revenue source to pay for that. Our dog control ordinance is very specific to dogs. A lot of people asked us why we don't do animal control, why we don't enforce issues with horses or cows, and that's because the ordinance is specific to dogs. I just don't see us putting anything together anytime in the near future that's going to require licensing of cats, because that's a much larger endeavor at the state level that I don't think anyone in the state is wanting to take on. But there are resources available with the Yamhill County Cat Coalition.
And can I make one more comment in regards to your opinion that dog control should not be funded from the general fund? Because not everybody has a dog. I don't have any children. Why should I fund the public school system? That is.
Thank you. Okay, Renee. You're passing? Okay. Kathleen.
Sit down like everybody else.
Oh, no, you can stand.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Do you need that?
Yeah, thanks. Actually, two things. One of them, and both of these are specifics, but you can apply them to general. One of them is about wild animals. The specific is we have a mama skunk in our neighborhood right now that's been out in the daytime. She's limping. And, so some of the neighbors are going, well, is this a rabid skunk? Is there something we should do? And if so, who the heck do we call? So that's one question. The other one is, and something other people are probably concerned about, and I think somebody mentioned, dogs that are running loose, have no collar. You may know where in the neighborhood they belong, but, I've talked to people before and I still see the dogs running loose. So what do you do? Who do you call?
So the answer for the first one is going to be one that we'll have to get some specific information and kind of put up on the website as an answer to it. I do know we have local trappers that help us with that type of stuff. In the past, our dog control had people that they could call that had traps. They could provide live traps for people. The question is, where do they go after they catch the animal? And typically we put it back on the owner. We'll provide you the trap. You can catch whatever it is that's in your neighborhood. Then you're going to have to find a place to rehouse that, whether that's carried up. Yeah, I wouldn't want to put, well, the injured part of it, you'd want to talk with the local vets. But the issue is when it comes to a wild animal like a skunk, if it's injured, you're probably going to be calling us to come help assist in disposing of it. And that's something that we would have to give you another answer at some other point. Yes.
Sheriff, I know from experience that you do take an animal that's not a domestic animal to a veterinary clinic. They can't by law
Take it.
treat it. They'll send you to the Audubon Society, so it's pretty much put back
On the owner.
Yeah.
So, and then in addition to the other question, as far as who do you call? So our dispatch center, which is our 911, I would not advocate calling 911 for a dog running down the street unless it was an emergency type of situation. But we do have non-emergency numbers that you can call into that dispatch center. What they would do is take all the information, and based on the jurisdiction of where you live, that would be determined on who's going to be dispatched. If you live in the city of McMinnville, the city of McMinnville would respond to deal with that. If it was in the county, we would respond.
What is that number?
513-434-6500.
Rebecca.
My question is, I'm with Family Pet Partners, Lost and Found Pets of Salem, Oregon, and now Newburgh, Dundee, and Yamhill, Carlton. And we pay for a rescue registration in Marion County because they require, in their ordinance and city code, they require a rescue registration if you're going to pick up dogs or house them for any period of time. And a couple of years ago, I had asked Yamhill County if they had anything written in the ordinance yet about that. Are you going to be including something like that in the new ordinance where rescue organizations would have to register and then be inspected?
That's a very good question, and that will be something that we'll put down as a note to take back to the county council. I know we were talking pretty heavily back and forth. How are we going to vet? I think someone referred to it as vetting out those groups that are going to come in and help us. And that would probably be a very easy way to approach that, is to build into the ordinance some way to require them to register and for us to go through the process. So I appreciate that. So was there anybody that had a question that didn't have an opportunity to fill out a form that wanted to ask the question? Come on up.
I understand that the resources are limited for, there hasn't been a dog control officer. Recently, my daughter was bit by a dog that was loose. My mom lives out in Yamhill County in the rural part of the area. A pit bull aggressively attacked her dog, came into her yard on her property multiple times. The sheriffs were involved, animal control's involved, and nothing's done. The dog's still running around terrorizing people. They've had to mace it, and I know that there's a kind of general frustration that there's no enforcement. And what kind of, I understand you're gonna rely on the nonprofits to pick the dogs up and do those things, but if there's no officer, there's nobody to help with these problems when people have a problem dog, what do you do so that you end up with people not shooting neighbors' dogs or things getting out of control because there's just no general enforcement? I live in Yamhill and you can walk a block and 5 dogs will come running out at you.
So the answer to that would be I have, of course, Captain Ray, who oversees a portion of our patrol division, the administrative part, the dog control part. We also have sergeants that supervise the deputies. If our deputies are going out and being engaged in these type of calls and it's obviously a nuisance, there's state statutes that still cover that. Our county ordinance still allows our deputies to enforce things under the county ordinance. And if things aren't being done, what I would encourage you to do is to reach out through Captain Ray or one of our sergeants to try to find out why isn't something being done? Are we at the status? Because I think that's the key is we don't know. The command staff doesn't know what's going on the front lines with the citizens that are frustrated if they don't call us and at least tell us, hey, this is an issue that we have that we need to deal with. A lot of times, a lot of those issues are resolved pretty quickly. A lot of times there's things going on in the back end that we don't know, you may not know. There may be reasons why the dogs haven't been taken yet. But that piece and that type of a process should still be in place through our patrol division. And if things aren't being handled appropriately, then we have a route through our front office, through our supervisors to deal with that. So, thank you. So, yes.
I'm really sorry I'm biking close, but I wrote here. So my question is, I'm one of the local veterinarians in Newburgh, and so I have two questions. In terms of rabies enforcement, will any of that be done? If a dog is not vaccinated for rabies and it bites somebody, what happens then?
So, right now, we have a process through public health where if there's a dog bite, our public health department is going to be sending out the notifications to the owners to make sure that the 10-day quarantine is done with. If the owner can't do the quarantine themselves, then we will coordinate with public health to get the dog to a facility to quarantine it for them. The cost of that quarantine will be the burden of the individual who owns the dog. And then at the end of that quarantine process, then public health will notify us to make sure that if the dog wasn't vaccinated, that we can follow up to make sure that that process gets taken care of.
So the process stays in place as it is now?
Correct. The only difference is that we used to do a lot of that processing, and it's under the public health division, and we've been meeting with them and have a process in place for public health to do that portion, and then if they have issues, they reach out to us.
But there's no one checking to see if anybody is current on their rabies vaccines anymore?
For Yamhill County, correct. For the county portion of the compliance, what we used to do, what we would consider a license checker. I think a lot of people thought that our two dog control officers were out knocking on doors, making sure people were licensed, and they weren't. We haven't done that for years. What we were doing is sending out mailers and postcards reminding people, time to get your license renewed, your rabies vaccination needs to be renewed, and that mailing type of process is still going to stay in place. We're going to put together a way to work with whoever's going to take on this part to continue the postcards. We're also working with our IT to try to find ways to streamline the licensing process so they can do it online, they can do it through their vets, they can do it through the different nonprofits, and make it easier for people to do that so they don't have to just come into our office. But at the end of the day, from a county perspective, we relying heavily on our patrol staff to be doing compliance checks when they're having dealings with dogs. We will be looking for neighbors who call in anonymously like they have been religiously saying, my neighbor's got 3 dogs, I don't think they're licensed. And then we can pass that information on and do the checks. But the concept of having an actual license checker who's doing the compliance piece, that's a part that we haven't had for several years, but it's something that could possibly be brought in through a third party at a contracted rate, much cheaper than what we can do. But that's something that we'd have to look at years down the road.
So my last question is, I still wasn't clear on if a sick or injured animal without an owner is located at, say, after hours. What's the process?
After hours, they will typically call our dispatch center. Our staff will pick up the dog, or the jurisdiction that has the dog will try to reach out to a vet. We have funding in the county to pay for those medical expenses on those type of dogs. What needs to be worked out specifically is what's going to happen in the city of Newburgh, and what's going to happen in Dundee, and what's going to happen in McMinnville. But I know that the thought process is that we're going to try to do all the same thing, work with the local vets that we know to try to get the dogs to the care. And then, like I said, the county has a pool of money through a medical line that's in our existing budget that we can use to pay for those expenses.
So my one concern that I would share with you is I am the only vet that does 24/7 emergency in Newburgh. So we're the ones who get the calls in those situations.
Yeah.
And so if you're working with other groups, I'm concerned about who is assessing the injury level of the animal and making the call on whether or not they need to be seen immediately by a veterinarian, or how they're being treated.
And that is something that we've been talking about. That is something we're going to have to figure out to get it like a triage set up. and some training to make sure that the care is properly and adequately given. Thank you. Yes, Rebecca. Is he working in this place or not?
This is kind of in response to the Newburgh situation. So there was a dog bite a couple weeks ago, and the police department was called, and they take that dog and quarantine the dog at the Newburgh Animal Shelter, which is great. It's a good partnership. And it's the regular 10-day quarantine for a dog bite. So people would just call Newburgh Dispatch, and the police department goes in. They still handle all of the enforcement in Newburgh for dangerous dogs. So that would be who would be called in Newburgh. And you had another question about, we also started, I'm also with the Newburgh Dundee Police Foundation, and we started a specific fund for police officers that come across dogs that are injured. So that way, if they have a dog that is hit by a car or something, they call your vet and bring the dog to you, and they can either access our funds or his funds to help with that. But the dog bite quarantine stuff is still handled by the law enforcement in Newburgh Dundee, and they'll take them to the shelter.
Okay. So, unless anybody else has any major questions, the next step after tonight is that we are going to put together kind of a list of frequently asked questions. We have a few other information talking points that we think are important for the general public to see. Yes.
I got one question. I'll just stand here if it's all right. It sounds to me like you're talking that the county jurisdiction is going to be county only, and each municipality is going to be responsible for its own reaching out to these organizations and coordinating what they're going to do with the dogs that they pick up, since you're only going to be handling county responses and county partnered cities. Is that correct?
Correct. However, we have already assisted in the facilitation of those conversations. We worked with the city of Newburgh Dundee, for example. I've met with the chief and the city manager in Newburgh. They've worked with their local nonprofit group, the Newburgh Friends Shelter. So we've helped facilitate those discussions.
It sounded kind of like everybody was dancing around
No.
that particular point and not just coming out and saying.
Correct. Yeah, it ultimately, I'm sure the city of McMinnville and the city of Newburgh and Dundee aren't very happy, but that is a responsibility that is going to be the burden of those cities for those areas. Yeah. And we, as a county, and my position for being the elected sheriff, I've, told those individuals and those cities that we're going to not just wash our hands completely, we're going to sit here and assist and continue to provide,
Well, I understand. Yeah. My uncle was the county sheriff of this county for 20 some odd years. So
very nice.
I understand the situation.
So from here, we're going to take some of the answers to some of the questions we have. We're going to put together a sheet that's going to be kind of like a frequently asked questions document with a lot of data and answers and maybe some links. And then we'll continue to update as things go. We'll put that on our website. We'll push it out on our social media. But as things continue to progress, I would encourage you that if you have an interest and you haven't heard anything recently, you haven't seen any new updates through the local paper or through our social media or on our website, to not hesitate to call into our office and ask for some updates. Yes.
Will you be holding any more meetings like this to keep the communities up to speed?
Probably. At the point where we get a little bit farther down the road than we are now, I'd probably say in the next 6 months or so, we will probably, when we have some major accomplishments and some major changes, and we've been able to knock a lot of the things off our list, then we'll probably set up another town hall meeting to explain it all at once. So, yes, please.
Could you speak to a timeline? I know we have a contract through, I guess it was October or the end of September with Pet Stop In. But what's the timeline for actually finalizing a partnership with the nonprofit?
So the hope is to have some sort of partnership in place with those nonprofits before the end of September, so that we have something in place starting October 1. We have all those requests sitting in our hands. Now it's just a matter of us reviewing it and reaching out to those and working with county council to put together the arrangements for that contract. That being said, as we move forward, that will get us from October 1 through June 30th. And then from that point, after we get those in place, starting in October, then that's when we'll start looking at the big picture and figuring out what we're going to need to do for long-term replacement of that process. Yes.
So it's always seemed to me that all of these things should have been done before the decisions were made to change dog control. So I wonder why that process seems to be flipped. It seems like
Which piece?
as far as what you're going to do, and now you're trying to get input from other people. It seems like those should have been flipped.
Well, that was in April, and we had conversations almost 3 years ago about the privatization of the kennel. And so
Negotiations were just talking.
it was open public meetings where we had discussions during our budget process about the need. We had an entire year where the commissioners asked the sheriff's office, this was prior to when I was a captain, to research all the different options that we had. And that was when we made the decision to go into a private contract for basically a kennel rental for the dogs. And then over this last 6 months to 8 months, when we started the budget process in January, it wasn't until February or March that we realized that we're not going to be able to make it too much farther down the road. And if we let this continue to go farther, we need to start having these conversations. So we had the work session in April. Our contract was up in June. We got it extended through the end of September. And so now we're trying to put things in place to carry us through the end of the fiscal year.
I hear what you're saying, it still doesn't make any sense to me.
Okay, so that being said, I appreciate you guys. Yes, Chief.
I didn't want to get put on the spot, but to answer your question, reference municipalities, we've been working with the sheriff's office for a number of months. They gave us a pretty good heads up that this was coming down the pipe. We've reached out to nonprofits who actually came to us and said, hey, we want to help. This is a pretty good format. And in our process is going to pretty closely mirror the sheriff's office with respect to how we're handling the enforcement piece. We do have municipal codes for vicious dogs, that sort of stuff, and it does mirror the county code. So if you're from McMinnville, it's going to be very similar to this. You're going to see a public-private partnership, and I think that's going to be successful. I think we've got people that are committed to it, and I know Captain Simons has worked close with Captain Ray. So I think it's going to be different for the PD. Never had to do this before, really, but at the long-term fix here is going to be it's going to work out, I think. So just be patient, I guess.
Oh, I appreciate that. So unless anybody has anything else, I appreciate you guys taking the time to come out and talk with us, and we'll keep you guys as informed as possible. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to call, and then we'll set up another time here in the next 6 months or so to bring you guys back. So thank you very much. Appreciate it. Have a good night.